Right, our next speaker is going to be telling us about the Sydney Opera House and the real story of it. So we welcome to the stage Eric Woodcock.
That? Yeah, that's right, all set to go. Right, hello everybody. Let's go. Right, so Sydney Opera House, one of the most famous buildings in the world. The myth is that it was designed and entirely by this genius of a Danish architect. But actually, the true story is far more interesting and far more tragic. In the early 1950s, the government of New South Wales decided that Sydney needed an opera house, and they were going to put it on Bennelong Point, which was a site of an old tram depot. And in order to get the best design possible, they decided to have an international competition. 223 entries came in, and they looked at all the different designs. Some of them were very conventional, some of them were a bit more exotic. But the one that really struck them was this. It was barely more than sketches, but nonetheless it conveyed the atmosphere of the yachts in Sydney Harbour, and somehow it was seen as being the way forward, even though it was such an ill-informed design. It was the work of Jørn Utzon, a Danish architect in his mid-30s, who up to that point had only built a series of housing estates and a water tower. So he wasn't exactly highly qualified for the job. And he visualised that there would be two parts to it, in line with what they wanted, which was a major hall where you could have opera and symphony orchestras, things like that, and a smaller hall where you could have drama recitals and maybe slightly smaller opera. Now, he was Danish, and this man, Ove Arup, was actually English, but his parents were Danish, so he kind of got the Danish psyche. And he was a very gifted structural engineer. So he got in touch with Jørn Utzon and said, I want to help you build this extraordinary building. And it was going to be built in basically three stages. The first stage was the podium, the kind of platform that it would sit on. And then you'd have these extraordinary shells, which would create a kind of outer carapace. And then the third stage would be the interior of the windows. Now, a lot of the design problems hadn't really been solved, but they needed to get on because there was a lot of impatience about wanting to get this thing done quickly. So they started building the podium. And even this was 2 years late. They wanted to open in 1963, but they were never going to achieve that. Trying to create these weird shells in a parabolic shape was proving impossible. But there was no way that you could make them stand up in high winds and so forth. So Jørn Utzon one day was peeling an orange, and he realised that if you peeled it in certain ways, you could create similar sort of shapes out of a sphere. So they got on with developing it in this sort of format, but it was wildly over budget, already 5 times over budget, 3 or 4 years late. The new government came in, Rob Askin was in charge, nice man, and he said, we've had enough of this. So basically, Jørn Utzon was sacked. He was sent back to Denmark, never came back again. And they brought in a local architect, again in his mid-30s, called Peter Hall, who'd done some justice buildings, some university buildings, and had very poor taste in hairstyles and suits. But nonetheless, he got on with it, and his job was to finish it. And he realised that it couldn't be finished in the way that Jørn Utzon wanted to finish it, and basically he had to simplify the design. The main hall would be a concert hall, symphonies and so forth, and opera, remember it's an opera house, was relegated to the smaller hall. The other big problem was the windows. These were the sort of windows that Jørn Utzon visualised that the building would have, but Peter Hall realised that you needed to do something which was much stronger and much bigger. He'd been to Kew Gardens in London, and he emulated the design actually of the Palm House there by creating these wonderful windows that hang off the insides of the shells and give you these marvellous views of the harbour. The interior, again, is not Jørn Utzon, it's Peter Hall. He designed all of this, although he tried to sort of emulate the, again, sort of Danish look, wood and so forth of Jørn Utzon's original vision. So when it comes to the end of it all, the building that we see today, Jørn Utzon celebrated, won big prizes, died a very, very happy man. It wouldn't have been possible to build it without the work of Ove Arup. because he worked out how you could actually make all this stand up. And his business went on to become one of the world's major structural engineers, still is today. But the tragic figure is Peter Hall, because Peter Hall actually got it done. He actually got it finished when it seemed impossible. And yet he was completely written out of the story for many, many years, and he died a lonely alcoholic when he was only 65. That is the true story of Sydney Opera House.